You're listening to What's the Difference, a podcast about living with invisible disabilities and kicking ass at life. We want to inform you that this episode was filmed prior to the coronavirus being declared a pandemic. As a result, this was the last time all of us were in the same room together. This was recorded on March 7th. We still want to bring you this episode. It's all about relationships. We hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions, you can email us at whatsthedifferencepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a comment on Instagram or Facebook. Enjoy the episode. Here I am with
Cynthia,
Sam, Stacie,
and of course I'm Jackie. And today what we're going to be focusing on is relationships and how, and in particular romantic relationships, because we spoke in our last episode about relationships with our parents and our families and also some of the challenges that we encountered in the school system. So today it's going to be more of a focus on how have our romantic lives been impacted by the challenges that we deal with. And I don't know who wants to start. I'm always glad to go first, but I feel like I should go first. Why don't you go first? You want me to go first?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. You guys are really putting me on the spot. Come on,
why don't you start with like first boyfriends or first relationship?
Okay, so
I feel like that's a good
so point. The first time I ever went on a date was when I was almost 20, because people were really annoyed with me, and probably because they didn't really understand why I was the way I was. A lot of my behaviors growing up were kind of influenced by the way I grew up with a disability, which was I was sheltered from a lot of other kids because of the germ factor. I couldn't be near a lot of other kids because of worries about spreading illnesses. So I spent most of my life interacting with adults. So I never really had a lot of friends at school till I was in university is when I started having a lot of friends. So I was kind of very socially awkward, and there were boys that I liked in high school, but it never amounted to more than me telling them that I liked them, and they were like, okay, thanks, and that was it. Which was, when you're a teenager, that's absolutely devastating. Am I not right?
Hey, at least you were able to tell them that you liked them. I had there were guys I liked in high school. They went to school, the boys' school next door to us, and I just didn't have the guts.
It was, after the first guy kind of said thank you, and then I found out the next day he had a girlfriend. I stopped doing that. And the next thing that happened was, I think I was in OAC. So so for anybody who doesn't know, OAC is like grade 13 that Ontario had until 2003, and then it was phased out. And I was the last year that actually had OAC. So in OAC, the last 2 weeks of OAC, I found this guy who I suddenly fell madly in love with, because that's what my 18-year-old self thought. And he barely knew I existed. And then I spent the last few days of high school just crying my eyes out because he didn't like me. But anyway, moving on, it took until the end of first year for me to meet a guy that I actually asked out on a date. We went out a couple times. I was madly crazy head over heels over him, but he was head over heels over Jesus. And so I found that out on our second date, and it was a little bit, disturbing to me because I had spent all this mental energy on imagining us together and imagining the first kiss and all that, and that never happened, except that he was still cuddling with me and told me, this was the funny thing, he told me that I reminded him of his little sister.
Ew.
Yeah, so that was weird. So that was my first experience dating, and
that's fun.
Then I think my first boyfriend was a few months later after that.
So there's your brother.
Yeah, basically. And his name was Alejandro, by the way. His name was
Alejandro.
Yes, but then I unfortunately didn't really understand where he was coming from, and it led to a big misunderstanding.
And it was your first, right? So anything can be the smallest thing that tips you off, and you're like, and then you just run back into a hole, and you're like, I don't want to do this.
And the thing is, he should have kind of figured out that I was interested in him that way, but that really had nothing to do with my disability in the end, because this was just my first experience, and I don't even know if he knew I had a heart condition. I have no idea. But then my first boyfriend, who was verbally abusive, I stayed with him for 6 months because at the time I didn't think I could find anything better. And I mean, I know he's happily married now and has moved on, and I've actually seen him. I saw him a few years ago walking down in my neighborhood, which was really weird because I hadn't seen him since I broke up with him in 2005. So
scary.
But he definitely tried to take control over me because of my disability. He would tell me I had to shave a certain way. He would tell me that he didn't want me with his friends because they might do something that I wouldn't get, that wouldn't be good for me. Or he would tell me, at one point we were hanging out and I told someone about my heart condition and my lung condition, and then after he got really mad at me for talking about my disability in front of somebody that he knew. Yeah. And there was one night that I remember I started getting a lot of heart palpitations, and this is something that's pretty normal for me. I'll go through phases where I get really bad heart palpitations, and it's scary. I mean, anybody who has them as an adult, like that's it's terrifying when your heart races. And even people with normal hearts can get that. We were going to hang out the entire night, and he didn't want to deal with it, so he drove me back to my parents' house because he just didn't want to deal with me having heart palpitations. So it was little things like that, and he was very verbally abusive, and the only nice thing he said to me came with an insult, which was, "You're so beautiful, but you don't listen." And of course, when you're 20 and it's your first relationship, it's hard to see that. But I've got a lot of stories after that happened, from after that relationship, which I can go into after. But let's hear from the rest of you first, because I've just monopolized at least 5 minutes. So, yeah, you want to start?
Okay. I never had real relationships that lasted more than 3 or 4 dates until I met the guy who is now my husband. I was very, very shy throughout middle and high school, partly because of the year I spent in Bermuda that basically destroyed all my self-confidence. And when I came back, when I was there and when I came back, I was at an all-girls school. Even though the boys' school is right next door, I never really did anything with the guys there. There was always this fear from my grandmother especially, who basically told me good Chinese girls don't go to dances. Even though I really wanted to go to a school dance in grade 7 and in grade 8, I didn't go because there was a fear that my grandmother would think I'm a bad girl. So I went to my first school dance in grade 10, and I didn't even get to dance with any of the guys. They didn't ask me. And yeah, keep in mind I had a really horrible acne situation at that time, so that even if it's covered up, I think they kind of knew. So they didn't ask me, and I didn't have the guts to ask any of them. So I didn't really date at all in high school, although a boy did kiss me when I was maybe 17 or 18. I was in a play. Very awkward. It was sort of at rehearsal, backstage kind of a thing, and I think he had a crush on me. But he was okay.
Was it part of a script, or was
no? It was backstage.
So just let's rehearse. And
no. And then there was a whole drought from that point until 4th year university, and I didn't ask guys out at that time in university, and there weren't really that many guys anyway. I was a drama and history major, and in drama, the few guys there, I think a lot of them liked guys too. Yeah. So
you probably had to be oh, I want him, no, you want him, no, I want him, and stuff like that. Yeah.
So and then the other guys were in history, they were okay, but I didn't have the guts. I really probably could have had a summer romance when I was away in the UK. My university, I went to Queen's, and we have a castle, Hurstmonceux Castle in southeast England, and I spent 2 months there, and I could have had a boyfriend, I guess, but again, super shy, and I also think a lot of them were already taken anyway. So the kiss didn't really come until 4th year. It was at a charity dance, and I was dancing with this guy, and we just suddenly started kissing, and that was that. I never really saw him again.
Sometimes those are the best ones.
That's how it works. He was in 3rd year anyway.
I had one of those.
Let's see what happened after that. Then there was a whole drought. I met some guys. I did go out on dates after that. Really, nothing lasted more than 3 or 4 months until I met the guy who's now my husband.
And you've been married 10 years.
Almost 10 years. 10 years in August, yes.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Was there anything that you think was influenced by the fact that you were worried about your seizures, or you were worried about...
No.
It never got to that point.
Never really got to that point.
Where you had the conversation?
Yeah. Most of the guys before my husband... I guess I lasted 3 dates, as long enough for me to kiss them, kind of a thing.
Yeah. So what happened when you told your husband?
Nothing.
He was
sure.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And that's what's different when you meet the right person. You know that they're just gonna say, yeah, that's
cool.
Totally cool. How far along were you with him when you told him?
Maybe the second date, because I knew there was some sort of thing. So I was very a click.
Oh,
there was no click.
That could be considered clicking too.
So I knew that it was going to be long term. So I was pretty open.
You
pretty
already
early.
knew on the first date, on the second date?
Second, third. I don't remember.
Wow.
I feel like you don't, I don't get when people say like, oh, it's the one, like, you're going to get married. But I feel like women usually know if it's like a more serious.
Yes.
When I met my husband, by the way, I don't say his name because he asked me not to. No, because like...
Let's give him a name like Barney.
Barney. Oh my god, he hates the Barney song. He hates this shit.
Okay, let's call him. How about Bert?
Bert.
I like Bruce.
It reminds me of burp. He burps a lot.
So then call him Bert.
Bert the burper? Burper Bert?
Yeah. So, but
Sorry.
I might call him Burp. Like,
okay,
by mistake. So, excuse me. Anyway, so Burp.
I feel like he's gonna be listening to this and be like, "Wow, I wish I just used my actual name."
And people with challenges can have a lot of fun too.
So, when I met Burp for the first time, he. Stop laughing!
I wonder how many listeners at this point have burst out laughing themselves just hearing us laugh like this. Maybe we should give him a different name. Ernie. Rather than Bert.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's all calm down. Meditate.
Okay. So actually, when I met Ernie for the first, like when I first laid my eyes on him, there was something about him that made me like say, this is going to be the person I'm gonna end up with. But then, as he like got to spend more time with me, I'm just like, get away from me, please. Like I was running away. I was literally the whole day. We met at a cottage event, and I was the whole day because everybody else was boring. Like people were climbing trees, and I'm just like, what the fuck is this? And he was just like, he was the most interesting person in the like outside at the party, but then still like I was just trying to get away from him, and the more I tried to get away, he was running towards me. I'm just like, and then when I got home, I told my mom, so I was at this party and there was this dude that like wouldn't leave me alone. And now he's my husband.
And now he's your husband. But
that's kind of what a husband is now.
You're just like, oh, go away on me. But let's go back to that point. Let's go back to that point because how has your disability influenced your dating life?
Which one?
And like the whole package.
Yeah.
The whole because all of us are like the whole package, right? So
it's kind of a very complicated situation because I have physical disability. Some people see it and some people don't. Just like you, Jackie, you didn't notice.
Although unless and the same with me. If they look at my scar, they could probably see I have a disability. But.
Yeah, and actually, when I met you, I didn't notice.
Yeah.
And Ernie like was looking at Facebook and she's like, oh, did you notice that this girl that we met has a scar? And I'm like, what? No. But yeah. So anyway, so some people see my disability and some people don't. Same thing with a lot of men. I didn't say to a lot of people that I had a disability in the first place, but when they realize themselves, they walk away. And I'm talking about dates.
Yeah.
And so some of the dates I wouldn't see after the first or second date either. There were cases where I was sexually assaulted. There were cases I was in 2 abusive relationships. I was verbally abused. I was physically abused. I was emotionally abused, etc., etc. This is not something that I'm really ready to speak about in detail, but I am writing about it, which is another way to cope with depression, but that's a whole other story. I actually dated someone who had Asperger's. That's didn't affect from like my disability anyway. He knew about it. He was okay with it, but I didn't know about his own diagnosis, which affected our breakup. And we broke up because of his actions. And then I found out after that it was because of his disability. So we ended up breaking up unknowingly because of Asperger's. And so because of my experiences with dating, I decided that on the first date, I would tell Ernie.
Still trying to get used to that name. Ernie.
Oh, Ernie.
Sorry. Does that make you Bert?
I decided on the first date that I would tell him, I would be honest with him and I would say, hey, I have cerebral palsy. I gave him a link to Wikipedia explaining to him what it is. He read of it and I gave him a choice to leave. He fully decided to stay, and that was without his father's approval, which is a whole other story, I think.
Don't forget to, at the end, we are going to talk a little bit about your book at the end of the episode, so
yeah,
we will talk about that, but it's definitely something that you'll be discussing in more detail as we go along in our journeys here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So everything was great when it comes to cerebral palsy. He kind of learned as we went, especially after we moved in together. Because they say you don't really get to know a person until they move in together. And that is absolutely true. Like, he only started to realize how it affects my daily life once we moved in. What was harder for him was when I was diagnosed with epilepsy and depression, because he was already used to seeing me as a person with cerebral palsy and me being quote unquote normal, whereas I was just becoming this very different person. Like, all the things that I used to be able to do, I couldn't do anymore. All the things that I used to enjoy, I wasn't enjoying anymore. Like, he was seeing me I was having 50 seizures a day at one point, and he was seeing me suffer for that amount of time. So that could be hard on the other person as well too, I suppose. And that put a lot of strain on we were engaged at that point. So that could say, like, we didn't have a really good engagement.
And that's usually, I've heard from a lot of people, that can be the most stressful year in your entire relationship, is the year that you're engaged.
Yeah. Especially if you're doing, like, the wedding planning and all that stuff. Like, it's a big stress.
Yeah, when we were engaged, we were doing wedding planning, we were business owners, and we were in and out of doctor's appointments. Fun. Fun.
So fun.
Yes, our first year of marriage was me having 50 seizures a day, getting worse and worse. And, like, epilepsy is not just about the seizures, it's about mentally being there with the person. I was mentally there. So that put a real strain on our marriage, too. I don't know how we stayed together.
Was some of this affected by your meds? The meds that you were on trial, like, trying different...
I was really misdiagnosed by a previous neurologist, and I was given the cheapest drugs because at the time I wasn't really working. So my doctor's solution was to give me the cheapest drugs and not giving me the right proper treatment that I was supposed to have. And my new neurologist said that, like, after I told him everything that had happened with me and how I was treated, he was looking at me and he's like, I don't know how you stayed alive. Like, you're not supposed to be here. I guess somebody wants me to be here. Here I am. So all that, on top of it all of that had happened because of our relationship troubles and me having endless seizures and not being able to live a normal life and not being able to work and everything else, and as well as my past, it really took a toll on me mentally and my mental health. And then I started having depression, which is another thing to be concerned about and be able to adjust to. And so he's like, a while ago, we were having this conversation. He's like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to help you. I look at you and I'm like, first of all, I don't know you and I can't help you. All of that in perspective makes you realize that my relationship with my health is more important to me than my relationship with my husband. Because if I don't have a good relationship with my health and with myself, I will not have a good relationship with my husband, my partner. Same with everyone else around me. Like, I have to take care of myself first and not my husband, and vice versa.
Yeah. So, we haven't heard from Sam yet.
So
Sam, let's hear about your dating life and how like... Because I'm sure we've all had the stories and we all can relate to each other in this way. So how has your vision kind of been, how has that impacted your dating life?
It's interesting because relationships, it's kind of funny because, like, all of my boyfriends, or like relationships that went on to be more serious, they all kind of knew beforehand. So my very first boyfriend was actually someone that I grew up with. He was in my main group of friends from karate. We had, like, grown up training together. I had known him for a few years. And we ended up going to the same high school. And we hadn't been in the same elementary school. And I was kind of excited because there was a few other people from karate that were at this high school. It was an art school, so you could apply for, like, music, dance, drama, whatever. And so he was a drummer. I was very infatuated with that when I was younger.
It's the drummer, right?
Yeah. I was like, ooh, he's crazy.
He hits the right notes.
Yeah, every time. Yeah. But yeah, like he kind of knew, like, he was familiar with it. It didn't really phase him. And I also, like, when you're like 15, 16, like, there wasn't much, I guess, because he had known for so long and it just had been a part of it. Like, he kind of knew what to expect. Like and if I just said like, oh, I just can't see that, or what's this? Like, he was right on it. He'd be like, oh, it's, this color, or that sign says this, or blah, blah, blah. Like, it wasn't new to him. Whereas I found after that, when I sort of started getting into college, or I started doing the whole like Tinder or Bumble circle of joy there.
Oh, I'm so glad in some ways that I did not grow up during that time, because that would have stressed me out so much more than I already
Well, I did meet my husband online back in like 2005.
But Tinder's a whole other animal.
Yeah, true.
It's a whole other
True.
yeah.
They're
Like,
whole
because quite a few
different.
people like met like either through chat rooms or like groups and stuff, and at least there like it was conversation based. Like, you met somebody based on like a similar interest or a hobby or whatever. Whereas like Tinder and Bumble and all of those apps is just it's all physical. So with that, what was kind of a struggle for me was like, okay, I'm a blind woman. I'm gonna go on a date, and like sometimes I may be uncertain if it's the same guy in the photo. Like,
wow. Something I never said, something I never would think about.
Second guess, because you're like, well, is this just because I'm not, I can't tell if his eyes are blue and not brown. I can't tell if maybe he's more of a sandy blonde than black hair. Like, complexion, maybe he looked paler in front. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I may not notice if the photo is 10 years old, because I don't notice things like wrinkles or just like certain stress on skin that ages somebody. I don't pick up on that. So as much as people are like, hee, I look beautiful forever, it's also when you're in that scenario, and when you were younger, you'd be like, oh, just don't meet a stranger. But with my generation, like, if you are dating which is how everybody dates, because even if you try to hit some guy up at a bar, chances are he's on his phone swiping
on
while
Tinder
you're
or Bumble,
while you're trying to talk to him anyway. So like, it's kind of complicated. So I was very smart about it. I played very safe, especially with the karate background. Like, I always told a girlfriend, like, hey, I tried not to tell my parents too much, just because I didn't want to put them through that stress all the time. But I did make sure, like, my roommates or one of my girlfriends from college or like somebody knew. I was like, hey, if you don't hear from me tomorrow, I may be kidnapped. I may have gotten murdered on this date that I'm going on. We don't know. I wouldn't go to like secondary places. If I did, it was somewhere like I had pre-picked out. Or if we went downtown, I would try to pick like an area I knew. Like, I'd pre-familiarize myself with places. Sometimes I would put it on my profile. Like, I kind of went through a phase. There was a few months where I had it on there, and that always led to like weird questions. Mm-hmm. And then there was a point in time where I didn't have it on there, and like that was kind of weird, because then sometimes you have to like bring it up, and bringing it up with a stranger that you're on a date with is a little weirder. So I think I just kept it on my profile. It was just easier that way. Even if you attract a couple weirdos, personally, I'd rather like weed out the weirdos online than like in person alone in a bar. Like, it just makes more sense that way.
Yeah. And now you've been in a relationship for almost a year and a half?
A year and a half, yeah.
And how did your boyfriend find out? Like, did you tell him? Like,
that's actually a great story. So we worked together part-time, and I had maybe been there for probably a year around when him and I sort of like got together. I had known him a little. I had kind of like peeked at him a few times, and I didn't find this out until after, but apparently on my way to work, since I use my cane, my white cane sometimes, or I'll pull it out like at an intersection when I'm about to cross, just so that other cars know that like, hey, if I cross at the wrong time, I'm not just a jackass that wants to cross whenever she wants. You're not just a Toronto person. I'm not a normal person from the GTA. So as I was crossing, one of the guys we worked with was in his truck and was like, holy shit, this girl we work with is blind. And then he went in, I found this out way later, and he went into the maintenance, like I guess their room, their lunchroom, their space, whatever it was, and was like, did you guys know that Sam is blind? And I guess the guy that I'm now dating was like, what? And they just all kind of like had this little freak out. And then I had slowly mentioned it to people. I think some people knew already, but I think it sort of sunk in when they saw that. Yeah. So he kind of knew. I don't know if he really got the extent of it. At one point he even said, he's like, oh, I thought you would use your cane more when we started dating. But like, it depends on where we're going. And like, he always sees me in comfortable places. So that's even a hard thing to do.
Actually,
It's such a horrible name.
Okay.
We'll give him a different name in the next episode.
Yeah.
Yes, I like Burp more.
We can go with Burp.
Anyway, so
he'll just have to be mad.
Sexy Burp.
So we were talking about like the whole podcast thing, and he met you and everything, and he's like asked me like, what is this girl doing there? Like, what disability does she have? And I tell him she's blind. No, she's not. Does she walk into walls?
People get so confused.
They do, and even I did.
so confused.
And I was even saying me too. Remember
what's
when I
so
first met
funny,
you?
yeah, and what's so funny to me is that like so many other things, like race and sexuality, people have come to, and maybe this is like a Toronto, Canada bubble, but so many people agree that those things are on a spectrum. Like, you can be bi. Some people think being bi isn't real. And so I kind of relate being visually impaired to being, like, a bi person. Because it's like that one, people think, oh, you're just a lesbian or you're just straight. Or you're just gay or just straight. It's like this weird middle area that people don't understand because they can't put it in one label or another.
Yeah, see, I think that one is also the generational thing.
Yeah.
And they're not willing, willing to learn.
Well, and to be fair, like in the old days, if you had any kind of disability, like even for me, so what's interesting is, so my condition is genetic, meaning like it's passed down through both sides of my family.
Yeah.
My mom always says that there was somebody that her mom talked about in their town in Italy, and how he struggled with light and he couldn't go outside all the time and he didn't really see very well. And if I think about it, like, that's kind of how you would explain my condition if I lived in a mountain in Italy in the 60s and there was no ophthalmologist or optometrist to give me a diagnosis. Like, if it took so long, like in the 90s, if it took 4 or 5 doctors to figure it out, what about in a country where you don't have as many resources? Like, of course, it would just kind of come, oh, you're just odd. You know how many people are like, oh, I just thought you were weird. And I'm like, yeah, I have congenital weirdness. Like, what does that mean? But
yeah,
see, it's these little quirks that people don't.
I'm gonna come back to that in a second.
That's something I struggled with before I was diagnosed with epilepsy, because like I always thought that like it was easier to live with an invisible disability than it was with living with a physical disability. Because like to me, it's like I'm always trying to hide my physical disability. That was like my goal in life, to like make it invisible. And then as I got to know more people with invisible disabilities, I realized like, well, at least like people understand why I am the way I am, right? Like that people understand why I can't go to certain places because that could be physically hard for me or something. And like when I was diagnosed with epilepsy, I couldn't go to clubs anymore. So it's like people don't understand why I can't go to clubs. It's like, oh no, you'll deal with it. I'm like, no, I won't.
no, because when the flashing lights come on,
you can't.
And then
the music,
and the music.
And it's so funny when
triggering.
people are willing to tell you what you can deal with.
Yeah.
Like, you've been in your body for how many years? Like, you're an adult. Even as a kid, like, it's weird that these people without any lived experience whatsoever are like, oh, it's okay, just cross the road without looking. You'll be fine. Like, no, I will not. I will not be fine, Carol, when I get hit by a car. Like, it just, it will not be, it won't be okay.
No.
And I have the same thing with depression too. Like I have a close friend that's like knew me at the exact time that I was starting to have all my issues, and we became close and everything. And she was telling me, like, I think I was saying it in the first episode, like she was like telling me, oh, you're not depressed, it's okay. Like you're
yeah, but try coming from a culture where they say it's a middle class invention.
That too. So I'm just like, I had a serious talk with her, and it's like, you either learn or shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
I mean, you speaking of the whole middle class, invention and all that, I think also in older generations in their time, they didn't have time for depression because, for example, they were in the depression in the 30s.
Yeah.
So they might have been depressed, but they were too busy working and trying to make that last, penny just to actually live their lives or survive. Something like depression or anxiety or anything like that we're more aware of it in this generation just because we have the technology that actually, first of all, the technology is probably what is causing some of our depression and anxiety.
For me, for sure.
Yeah, so, but it's different now. Like, it's, people who come from war-torn countries, they might be fine in their own country and they might be dealing with things fine because they're in the midst of it. And then they'll immigrate to Canada and they'll suddenly be hit with post-traumatic stress disorder because everything, now that they're safe, everything that happened. And I mean, this is just my guess. I could be completely wrong, but I would imagine that for someone who's been through that and they come to Canada and they're finally safe and then suddenly it hits them, all the reality of what they were living in, and it's just really, really hard.
It's also the stress of adjusting to a new country, language, yada yada. So
I mean, like, it could be anything really. I have many friends with depression and anxiety. I have numerous family members with depression and anxiety, and they all have very different reasons. So it's like, it's not just like one reason or another. It could be like 50 reasons, and there could be 50 ways of coping with it. So like what works for like one person A might not work for person B, right?
And that brings me back kind of to the original, like when I was talking about my first boyfriend. And one of the times I actually admitted to him that I have obsessive compulsive disorder, which something that I thought I grew out of, but apparently my psychiatrist told me yesterday that I still have it. So it actually makes me feel a bit better because it explains a lot that's going on in my head. But I told that boyfriend that I had obsessive compulsive disorder, and his first words to me were like, oh, well then you're never going to get better. And it's just like, thanks a lot, buddy. Thanks a lot. And then,
I wish you could see my face right now.
Yeah, no, so it's sort of like that. And then, I think my second boyfriend had mental health issues as well, but he wouldn't have admitted it.
And that's a big problem in relationships.
Mm-hmm. That is, and my second boyfriend also, to this day, I still remember him the most fondly of any of my exes because he was just a really good guy, but we were not compatible on that level. And I remember telling him that I didn't know if I could have kids and then I might have to adopt. At the time, we didn't know about surrogacy. It wasn't really a thing that anybody talked about. And he said to me, I can't adopt. I need to have a natural child. And I said to him, well, I might not be able to give you one. And our relationship ended about 2 months after that. And that wasn't the main reason it ended. It ended for other reasons as well. But that definitely is something that impacts relationships if you're having to talk about kids. And if, like, let's say you can't have kids, and people will say, well, then bye, see ya. And I had after that first boyfriend, I think I had 3 other boyfriends before I met my husband and like a couple of flings. And I can't tell you how many times I was ghosted because of my medical condition. And it was horribly maddening and very upsetting because I was honest with people. And maybe I shouldn't have been. But I remember one instance where as soon as I told the guy that I had a medical condition, he was talking about like having a third date, and I thought we really liked each other. And then I told him about my medical condition, and then he dumped me. There was one guy that I had a fling with, and I remember him saying, well, I guess we can't have sex in certain positions because it might hurt you. And what? I was going, no, that has nothing to do with my heart condition. What are you talking about? There was another guy too and I think this was the one that stood out to me the most, which was the most disturbing. And it was about 6 months before I met my husband. And I was going through a bad time. My grandfather had just died, and I was very close with my grandfather, so it was really tough on me. And I had a wisdom tooth infection. And anybody knows who still has their wisdom teeth, that a wisdom tooth infection is extremely painful. And I had told
I got mine taken out.
Yeah. For me, it's a risk to take them out because of my heart condition. So I have to be careful, and trying to keep them in and not infected is probably the best way to go. And so what happened was this guy, I guess I had told him about my disabilities, and he knew also that I was having trouble eating because I couldn't chew. My teeth hurt so much. And he just said, well, you're just a fragile, you're just about to break apart. And I was ready to kill him. I didn't.
Obviously, since you're not in jail.
I'm not in jail. I did not kill him. But I did the next day after, because he said a bunch of nasty things to me that night, including telling me that I was a tease sexually just to bother him. Guys use that for power and control. And so the next day I dumped him, and he seemed quite happy with that. And then a couple years later, he tried to add me to LinkedIn, which is the killer.
Why is it always LinkedIn?
I don't know.
Because LinkedIn is all about
weird on LinkedIn. Stop being weird on LinkedIn.
I can't tell you how many of my ex-dates who didn't want anything to do with me because of my heart condition tried to connect with me on LinkedIn after.
We don't want you.
No, we don't want to ever see you again. There's a reason we dumped
you.
We don't want you on our LinkedIn. Get the hell out of my life.
It's probably because they can't find you anywhere else, or it's harder to find you anywhere else.
Or they just can't find a job, and they're like,
I don't need a job.
They
think that you can get them a job. They think, I might have rejected you, but can you get me a job? No, I can't get you a job. Fuck off. Anyway, the guy that I actually was with before I met my husband, sexually assaulted me. And he was also, I think, he was probably overwhelmed by my medical conditions, and was like, I remember one time when I have some stomach issues. They're nothing actually diagnosed, but it's very mild. Like back then I didn't eat a lot and I was struggling to eat. And he's like, you're anorexic. And I just was ready to slap him because that's actually the one mental disabilities that I don't have. I think I have everything else, but I've never been anorexic. And so I was like, oh, thanks, add on another one. Why don't you? But then he kept insisting that he wanted to have unprotected sex with me. And I kept saying no. And then I gave in, which was horrible. And I felt horrible about it for months and months. And I still do to this day. And I kept saying, why didn't I just say no? And then the whole, a couple of years ago, the whole Me Too movement started. And I realized it wasn't my fault. Kind of like I realized that a lot of women had been through the same thing as me. But I'm sure it was a power trip at some point. And then I dumped him. And then he kept trying to crawl back to me. I don't know why.
Oh, I had a guy like that. I dumped him. And a few years later, just before I met my husband, he gives me a call and says, hey, do you want to go out?
My ex-boyfriend sexually assaulted me in front of my husband.
But wait, did they both follow you on LinkedIn after, though? That's the question. Did they both ask?
No, my ex tried to add me on Facebook constantly, and he would invite me to all these lame parties that he would have at his house. I don't know why I went there. I probably like the whole like sexual assault survivors. We're just like we think differently, and
we don't think sometimes we don't think we were sexually assaulted.
It actually shows that it can change your brain, it can change you mentally. Yeah, it can actually change the chemical balance in your brain when you're sexually, whether it's as a child or as an adult or what it is. It's a traumatic experience.
Even the guy who I just mentioned, who said earlier about how you're just so fragile, you're going to break apart, he actually sexually assaulted me as well. So I've been sexually assaulted by 2 different guys, and I'm not entirely sure that the guy who asked me, oh, can you not do it in this position because of your heart disease, I've looked back at my diary and I think now he actually sexually assaulted me as well. It's hard because you don't think of those things when you're in the moment, but now that we're kind of more all aware of everybody's experience and it's kind of out there in 2020, I realize how many of these cases where I actually, I was sexually assaulted.
And I think because I stopped drinking completely, because a lot of the times that I was sexually assaulted at parties by my friends, it was when I was drinking. And
but you shouldn't have to stop drinking because of that.
It wasn't fully because of the reason I stopped. I also stopped drinking because of health reasons and because I just didn't like myself when I drank. So
yeah, because epilepsy meds can do a number on your liver.
Yeah, and so I just don't like myself in that state. And a lot of the times that I was sexually assaulted, and it was in front of Burke, but I realized he's not going to be there with me all the time. No. So what do I do in situations where he's not there? Because I was sexually assaulted to the point where in front of him, where I was practically dragged to a bedroom, and he yelled at the guy, and then this is me, and then he came to my friend, he whispered, "This is me being nice. The next time, cops will be at your house." But I mean, again, it's my husband isn't going to be there all the time, and I want to know that I'll be safe.
And the thing is, and you shouldn't have to have a man there to protect you.
Yeah,
exactly. That's just it.
You shouldn't the fake absence of a man. My favorite is when guys find you at a bar and you say no 20 times, and then you're like, "I have a boyfriend," and they're like, tell him I'm sorry. Tell me you're sorry, you bum.
Don't tell him. Tell me.
That's true too.
Yeah, the absence I hate, and I honestly have refused ever since I kind of caught on to that. I have refused to use the the fake presence of a man. Not saying that if you're in a relationship it's fake, but if a man who isn't physically there can stop you from harassing me and I can't stop you from harassing me, screw you. I will punch you in the face.
And actually one of the man who was friend of a friend who sexually assaulted me, a lot of people, holy shit, he apologized to Burke the next day. Burke messaged him in response, "Why are you should apologize to her."
What the hell?
Or if anything, if you're apologizing to the boyfriend, the husband, the partner, you can apologize, but apologize to the woman first.
Yeah, because that goes back to the traditional, a lot of people don't know that the word rape is actually a traditional word for stolen or damaged property. And that was back when women weren't considered people.
Yeah.
And so that's why sexual assault is the correct term to use. And by apologizing to the, I'm sorry, sir, that I assaulted your wife, that's totally making you an object. That's awful. And I don't understand how people, guys will apologize to other guys before they'll even think of apologizing.
Yeah, sorry, I'm very old-fashioned.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so this conversation alone about relationships and about me and my lack of relationships is already something that I'm not comfortable talking about.
And that's okay. So, and I actually was gonna try to change the topic a little bit because and this is another thing that we deal with once we meet the person of our dreams and we're okay, we're gonna be with this person for life, then there's the issue of having children. And Cynthia, you've got a really good story about this, and I want to hear
about me having kids, or
just about your kind of, and we're gonna cover this in another episode. We're gonna talk about having kids and passing on our genes to our kids, but I want to just kind of a brief thing of what happened with your husband, kind of what happened when you told him you can't have kids necessarily the normal way, and how that
he was completely. Oh yeah, sure, okay. I told him pretty early on that if we were to marry and have a family that would be adopting, because I have neurofibromatosis, which is a genetic condition that can be passed on to children, biological children. And we actually did look into adoption for a while, but that didn't work out. And we now have a little boy through surrogacy, gestational surrogacy. So we originally were looking at egg donors, but there aren't that many egg donors who are of East Asian heritage. There's a whole cultural thing about donating anonymously, and which we'll get into in another episode. So we ended up using a donor embryo, and our son is mixed ethnicity. So he is half Asian and half Caucasian, and we're very blessed.
And he has shocking red hair from the photos, at least.
Yes, in certain light, and it's more brown in person and in regular light. Yeah.
And so when you told your husband that this is kind of what we have to do, what was his first reaction?
I don't really remember. He was just so yeah, whatever. That
That's so positive though, and that's probably why you don't think of it much, because it wasn't like a scarring experience. It was just like a natural, supportive.
And I think we all have our horror stories here, but we all have our good stories as well, because all of us now are in good relationships. Whether we're married or dating or whatever it is, we are happy with our current partners, very, very happy. And I think my story was after that horrible guy who hurt me, 3 weeks later, I met my husband, which was, of course, I didn't know at the time he was my husband to be, but on the first date, it was one of those things again where it's like,
it clicked.
We clicked, and I was like, I don't know yet if this is long term, but I know this is at least short term. Then date 2, it was really awkward and stuff, and I was going, I don't know. And then date 3, we sat through a movie for 2 hours, and of course you don't talk when you're at a movie, right? And then the funny thing was, this is when, after the movie, I told him, I don't think I'm interested in a relationship right now. I was pretty scarred from the last guy. And he was like, okay. And I started telling him all about my heart condition and about my surgeries and all that. And I opened up to him, and he was just listening, and he was like asking good questions, and he was kind of like, well, I haven't exactly had the best dating life, and he told me about his dating struggles, and we ended up talking for 2 hours after this movie, sitting in Fairview Mall, which is in Toronto for people who are not living in Toronto, but
in the suburbs-ish.
It's suburbs-ish Toronto. We were sitting on a bench in the mall for 2 hours just talking, and then we walked out to my car, sat in my car for a while longer, and just talked and talked and talked. And I think I drove him back to his car, and I drove home, and I told my mom, and I'm like, I'm going to marry him. And it's funny, we hadn't even kissed yet, and I just said, I'm going to marry this guy. I know I'm going to marry him. And then the next date was kind of when we started getting more serious, and then date 6, I said, I know you're the one. And he said, I'm cool with that.
Oh, that sounds like my first date with my husband.
Yeah. And like, that's fine. If I'm the one, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, with my husband now, we met online on I think on a site that no longer exists. It was called Lava Life.
Oh my god. My cousin met his wife on Lava Life. I'm pretty sure they went on.
And I met my husband off of like an offshoot of Plenty of Fish. So
am I the only one that met my husband like in person? The older version?
Your boyfriend.
Mine's not a husband, but
it's okay.
Maybe one day.
A partner. Yes.
But on our first date, I can remember exactly where we met in person, because we were actually talking on the phone for like a month before that. I remember what I ate and what he ate, and it was at a cafe in Yorkville that no longer exists. We just sat outside on a bench, and we talked and talked and talked probably for an hour before I said I had to go, because I was living with my parents at that time, and I had to go home for dinner.
Yeah, no, that's probably how a lot of my dates ended too. I'm living with my parents, so I have to go home for dinner. And I think the best thing too about my husband was that he was also living at home, and he's quite a bit older than me. I mean, now not so much. He's 5.5 years older, but at the time I was 27 and he was 30, going on 33. So, and we both lived at home, so we could kind of relate to that. And then, as it kind of went on, like we knew date 6, we were like, okay, this is getting serious. 2 months in, I gave him the talk about, okay, I want kids, but I don't think I'm going to be able to have them the traditional way. At that point, I was considering surrogacy myself. I didn't really know a lot about it. This was 2011, so I didn't know a lot about it yet, but I was telling him that was an option, and he was like, as long as we have kids, I don't care how we have kids. And I was just, I'm so relieved. I am so relieved, because that had been such a sticking point with other guys. So that was, at that point, I was like, okay, yeah, I can marry this guy. And then a year later we were engaged, and a year after that we were married. So
oh wow, that was
we was fast.
So different.
I mean, like you earlier, Jackie, you said something about a guy ghosting you. I have a breakup story that was really, really interesting.
Oh.
Anyway, so I met this guy at a party, believe it or not. I did meet him at a party. And we went out 2, 3, 4 times maybe. And then all of a sudden, this was like, I didn't even tell him about my health issues. He sends me an email and says, I don't know where I'm going to be in a year. I could be in Toronto. I could be in London, England. So basically, that was his breakup letter to me.
Oh, I love
by email. And this was like...
That's okay, I broke up with him on Facebook.
This was like 2002-ish, 2003. So like a lot of people were still watching Sex and the City.
Okay,
And this was actually before the sticky note breakup on Sex and the City.
Oh
so,
my God,
so I was like,
best.
I didn't even, I was like, there was no social, so I wouldn't have posted it on anywhere. I was like, how did they know? Yours is more interesting, writers. You had a better one.
Yeah. Oh, that's what.
Yeah.
Because you and I are a little bit older, so we kind of had like email breakups before,
Yeah.
Now is it what? Do people break up on TikTok now?
No. I feel like now, like, unfortunately, if you're not in a relationship, like, everyone I know, like, out of all my friends, their relationships, and it's been, like, a year or 5 years, like, longer things, or if you're in the dating quotation, it's like you just get ghosted. You know what? People complain all the time about ghosting, but, like, there has been several situations where I've tried to tell guys, like, whether you're, like, talking online and maybe you haven't met them in person, and I just say, you know what? Hey, I'm not feeling this. I'm really sorry. You seem super cool, but I'm gonna tap out. Like, I'm just not feeling it. And then they, like, get so, like, it's like they don't hear you.
No, they
don't hear you. And then when you do stop talking, because you're like, okay, well, I've told you 5 times, I've never met you in person, so I don't have to deal with this anymore. Then they're like, they get angry and they're like, oh, you're just ghosting me. And I'm like, did you not read the previous 5
You were nice enough not to ghost them.
Yeah.
You actually told them, I'm not feeling it. Bye.
As much as sometimes I know people ghost, and I'm guilty of it, especially in that weird Tinder Bumble world.
Yeah.
Especially if you haven't met the person. But also, like, there are also things, I think people are normally fairly decent. It's just like when you're into somebody, it's like hard to hear the no.
Yeah.
So all my friends were like, all my single friends were complaining about like the whole dating scene and the
people
online.
are ruthless. People are pretty harsh.
So I decided to do a little experiment with Burke's permission. Obviously, he knew all about it. I made a Tinder profile.
Did you find him an Ernie? Bert looking for Ernie. Single bachelor apartment.
So I went on Tinder. The first guy who, whatever, I don't remember what the hell it was, like whatever, swiped left or swiped right. First guy I talked to, he's great. He was great. He was 31 and I was like 29. So we had a 2-year age difference. He was in HR, just like, I mean, I'm not in HR, but I have an educational background in HR. He has his own business, just like me. Like, he was from Israel. He knew Russian. His parents are from Russia. That was perfect. And so he asked me out. The first guy he asked me out. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? So, and by the way, I had a picture that, I had my eyes closed, and he was like, I don't mean to be rude, but are you blind?
Oh my God! I feel like that's what people think. They're like, where's your blind photo? And I'm like, that's not what I look like.
Yeah.
That's not what I do.
I think the one thing that we've all come to the conclusion here is that despite the fact that we've all had challenges, we've all led very normal dating lifestyles in some portions of it. Yes, we've had to deal with adversity because of our challenges, but at the same time, we've had very normal experiences that everybody else has had in the last 20 years. Stacie, you wanted to mention your book.
It's called 12 Years a Woman, My Journey to Happiness. And it is all about my life living with epilepsy and depression, as well as for that, all the things that had led to my depression and everything else, trauma, and so on and so forth. So you'll get to see glimpses of my personal life, my family life, my relationship, my friendships, and a little bit about my business.
And I think that if yours does well, I think I might follow and try to do my own.
I'm the tester.
You're the test for me, because I would love to write about my own story. But I do want to thank everybody for participating today. I know, Cynthia, it was a little tough for you to hear all that, but you know what? It's good that you're in an environment where we're all safe here. We're in a safe environment.
I'm not even comfortable with that whole safe word thing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like, I'm a person who expects children to address me as Ms. or Mrs.
That's okay. And that's okay that we've all had different experiences. And you know what? We're in 2020. The world, yes, is kind of messed up. And we've got coronavirus going around everywhere right now. We will be back on What's the Difference. Remember to follow us on Facebook at What's the Difference Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at What's the Difference Podcast. And if you have any questions for us or you want to be a guest on our show, email us at What's the Difference Podcast at gmail.com. Thank you, all three of you, for participating in today's episode.
Bye!
Bye. Adios.
Okay, everyone, we'll see you. Bye-bye.